We can't let this destroy everything we've built between us.
It won't. I promise you.
Why humans die for each other. The reactor was going to kill someone. Everyone on the bridge knew it. Nobody knew who. Captain Elena Reyes stood in the shuddering red light of the Horizon's reach, watching the containment field around her ship's fusion core buckle like paper in a storm. Alarms screamed through the corridors. The deck tilted 11 degrees and held. Core breach in 90 seconds, said the ship's AI, calm as a librarian reading a due date. Radiation flooding engineering deck 3. Nobody moved to save themselves. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb was already sprinting toward the breach, toward the radiation, toward the thing that would kill him. Behind him, 3 junior engineers reached for their emergency suits, suits that would only slow the dying, not stop it. "Webb, get out of there!" Reyes shouted over the comm. "Negative, Captain." His voice didn't shake. "If I don't manually vent the secondary line, this whole ship goes up with 400 souls on it. I've got 60 seconds, that's enough." It wasn't enough. Everyone who understood physics knew it wasn't enough. He did it anyway. 23-year-old cadet Sophia Marine watched him go from the observation deck, her hands pressed white against the transparent alloy. She had known Marcus Webb for 4 months. He had taught her how to splice a coolant line, how to tell a bad seal from a good one by sound alone, how to laugh at 3 in the morning during a maintenance shift when the exhaustion made everything feel hopeless. She had never told him that he reminded her of her father, dead 6 years now in a mining accident on Titan. She had meant to. There had always been more time, until suddenly there wasn't. "Webb, please," she whispered into a comm channel he could no longer hear. The venting alarm cut off half a second before the emergency bulkhead sealed. The corridor beyond them went dark. Marcus Webb did not walk back out. 400 people kept breathing because of it. Sophia Marine would spend the rest of her life making sure that meant something. 90 million kilometers away, hidden inside the drifting husk of a dead comet, a Calith reconnaissance drone recorded everything. The drone's operator was Vorthal Ashi Karel, third voice of the Dominion fleet, a being who had watched 400 species live and die across 11,000 years of conquest. Vorthal had seen soldiers flee. He had seen soldiers surrender. He had seen soldiers beg. He had never seen what he was seeing now. The human engineer walked into certain death without a single order forcing him to. He did it so that people he might never speak to again could keep breathing. Vorthal replayed the footage 4 times. "Explain this," he said to his tactical officer, a small 4-armed being named Tessic. "There is no genetic directive requiring this behavior. There is no hive resonance compelling loyalty. He received no benefit. He gained nothing." Tessic studied the readouts. Perhaps he was defective, a malfunctioning individual. "Pull up the crew manifest," Vorthal said. "Cross-reference for similar incidents across all human vessels we've observed this cycle." The answer came back in less than a minute. 41 incidents. 41 humans, on 41 different ships, had done something similar in the last standard month alone. Vorthal Ashi Karel felt something he had not felt in 11,000 years of conquest. He felt afraid, and he did not yet know why. Before he understood any of that, Vorthal had already made up his mind about humanity, the way every Dominion officer had. The Dominion's first scans of Earth's outer colonies had shown scattered settlements with no unified fleet, no shared command structure, no resonance network binding them together at all. 91 worlds had taught the Dominion exactly what that meant. Species without a collective mind fractured under pressure. They bickered over resources. They abandoned each other the moment survival was at stake. It had happened on Kelvar. It had happened on the moons of Thren. It had happened, without exception, on every world the Dominion had ever touched. Humanity, by every metric the Dominion possessed, should have been the easiest conquest in 11,000 years. Weak, fractured, biologically fragile, Tessic had summarized in the initial briefing, 3 weeks before the 9th silence ever reached New Meridian. No hive coordination, no collective memory, recommend minimal force allocation. Vorthal had agreed with that assessment completely. It was the last time he would ever agree with it. The Caliph Dominion did not fear anything. That was the first truth every cadet in the Dominion Academy learned before they learned to walk in null gravity. They had conquered 91 worlds. They had absorbed the knowledge, the labor, and eventually the biomass of 600 species. Their strength came from a simple, elegant principle. No Caliph warrior feared death because no Caliph warrior was ever truly alone. Every Caliph was born linked into the resonance, a neural network threaded through their species since birth. When one Caliph died, their memories flowed backward into the collective before the body went cold. Nothing was ever lost. No one ever really died. That was why they didn't understand humans. Humans died completely. Humans died alone, in the dark, in the cold vacuum of space, and nothing of them transferred to anyone else. No memories, no data, no resonance. When a human died, that human was simply gone. And yet they kept doing it for each other, over and over, as if death itself meant nothing next to the people they loved. To Verthael, that made no sense. To Verthael, that made them either the weakest species he had ever encountered or the most dangerous. He intended to find out which. 3 days after the reactor incident, Dominion warships dropped out of transit space above the human colony of New Meridian, a farming settlement of 80,000 people orbiting a quiet yellow star nobody in the galaxy had bothered to name. The colonists had no orbital defense platforms, no warships, no fleet. Vorthal's flagship, the Ninth Silence, was 3 kilometers of black hull bristling with plasma cannons designed to crack planets like eggs. 12 escort cruisers flanked it, each one capable of erasing New Meridian's largest city in a single volley. Population estimate 82,4011, Tessic reported. Military capability negligible. Recommend immediate subjugation protocol. Send the standard message, Vorthal said. A voice boomed down from the sky over every settlement on New Meridian, translated instantly into every human language on the planet by Dominion linguistic algorithms that had cracked human speech in under 6 hours. People of this world, you are now the property of the Caliph Dominion. Resistance will result in the destruction of your settlements. Surrender your leadership and you will be permitted to serve. In the town square of New Meridian's capital, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei looked up at the sky, then looked at the terrified faces of the children she had gathered into the town hall that morning. She did not surrender. She picked up a rifle that had been sitting in a display case since the colony's founding. Decorative, ceremonial, meant to honor ancestors who had fought wars on old Earth, and she walked out into the street. Behind her, one by one, other colonists picked up whatever they had. Hunting rifles, farm equipment, kitchen knives. A teenager grabbed a fire extinguisher because it was the only thing within reach. None of them could stop a single Dominion soldier, let alone 12 warships. They stood in the street anyway. From orbit, Vorthal watched the sensor feed with something close to disbelief. They have no weapons capable of harming us, Tessic said. Why do they stand? I don't know. Vorthal said quietly, send down the first landing team. Do not kill unless necessary. I want prisoners. I want answers. The Dominion soldiers who dropped onto New Meridian's main square were 7 feet tall, armored in dark ceramic plating, armed with weapons that could vaporize a human body in half a second. Dr. Amara Osei stood at the front of the crowd, rifle raised, hands shaking so badly she could barely aim. The lead Dominion soldier raised a translator unit. Lower your weapon. You cannot win this. I know, Amara said. Then why do you stand here? Amara looked back at the town hall behind her where 40 children were hiding, where her own daughter was hiding. Because if I don't, she said, you walk past me to get to them. The soldier paused. In 11,000 years of Dominion conquest logs, no subjugated species had ever given that answer. They took her prisoner instead of killing her. Something about her answer had unsettled even the soldier's combat directive. It was the first mistake the Dominion made on New Meridian. It would not be the last. Aboard the Ninth Silence, 3 days later, Vorthal Ashi Karel stood in an observation chamber overlooking the detention wing, watching 41 human prisoners through reinforced transparent alloy. The humans did not behave like any conquered species he had processed before. They shared their food rations, even though rationing meant some of them would go hungry. They took turns standing watch through the night cycle, even though Dominion sensors made human vigilance completely pointless. An elderly man named Joseph Kimura, a retired schoolteacher who had been swept up in the initial arrest, spent every waking hour teaching the younger prisoners how to keep their spirits up, telling them stories, making them laugh in a cell built to break their will. And Dr. Amara Osei, the woman who had stood in the street with a ceremonial rifle, had somehow become the quiet center of the entire group. When new prisoners arrived, frightened and disoriented, they gravitated toward her without being told to. "She holds no rank," Tessic observed. "She has no resonance link binding the others to her. Explain her authority." "I don't think it's authority," Vorthal said. "I think it's trust." He had begun keeping a private log, something no third voice of the Dominion fleet had done in recorded history. He wrote his observations by hand in the old symbolic script his ancestors had used before the resonance made written language obsolete. Entry: "These creatures die completely, and yet they act as if death does not frighten them. I believe I have misunderstood something fundamental about this species. I do not yet know what." He requested permission to interrogate Dr. Osei personally. The interrogation chamber was small, sterile, lit by a single overhead light designed to feel clinical rather than threatening. Vorthal had studied enough of Earth's history through captured data archives to know that fear-based interrogation produced unreliable information. He preferred a different method. He preferred honesty. "Dr. Osei," he said, his translator rendering his voice into calm, accented English. "I would like to understand you." Amara sat across from him, hands folded, exhausted but unbroken. "That's a strange thing for a conqueror to say." "I have conquered 91 worlds," Vorthal said. "I understood every one of them within the first cycle of contact. Fear, hierarchy, self-preservation. These are universal constants across every species the Dominion has encountered, and we don't fit." "You do not fit, you do not fit," Vorthal agreed. "Your engineer died to save people who could not repay him. Your colonists stood against warships they knew could not be defeated. You, specifically, offered your own life to protect children who are not biologically yours." Amara's jaw tightened. "Her name is Naya. She's my daughter. Doesn't matter that she's not blood, she's mine." "Explain that to me," Vorthal said, and for the first time, something in his voice sounded almost desperate to understand. "In the Dominion, kinship is determined by resonance lineage. It is not chosen. It cannot be chosen. You are telling me that humans choose who they belong to." "All the time," Amara said. "We choose it every single day. Why would you risk death for a choice? A choice can be unmade. A resonance bond cannot." Amara leaned forward. "That's exactly why it matters. Because we could walk away, because nothing forces us to stay, and we stay anyway. That's not weakness, Commander. That's the whole point." Vorthal sat in silence for a long moment. "I do not understand," he finally admitted. "You will," Amara said. "Probably right before it cost you something you didn't expect to lose." Vorthal studied her for a long moment, his translator humming softly in the silence between them. "May I ask you something else?" "You're the one holding the questions, Commander. Go ahead." "When your engineer walked into that reactor," Vorthal said, "did he know for certain he would fail to survive it?" "He knew," Amara said. "Marcus wasn't a fool. He understood the physics better than anyone on that ship." "Then explain the calculation." "In Dominion doctrine, a soldier who cannot survive a mission is reassigned, not sent to certain death, because a dead soldier provides no further value to the collective. What value did he gain by dying, knowing he would die?" Amara was quiet for a moment. "None." "That's the part you keep missing. He didn't do it for value. He did it because 400 people would live, and he decided that mattered more than whether he got to keep living himself." "That is not a rational trade," Vorthal said. "No," Amara agreed. "It isn't. That's what makes it worth something. Anyone can be generous when it costs them nothing, Commander. It's only real when it costs everything." Vorthal absorbed that in silence, the way he absorbed every piece of data that refused to fit his models. turning it over again and again until it either broke or reshaped him. In the resonance, he said slowly, nothing is ever truly given away. When I share memory, share thought, share pain, the collective simply becomes larger. I lose nothing by sharing everything. I have never once, in 11,000 years, made a choice that cost me something I could not recover. That sounds lonely, Amara said. Vorthal looked up sharply. I have never been alone in my entire existence. That's not what I mean. Amara leaned forward. If nothing ever costs you anything, Commander, then nothing you do actually means anything either. You've never had to choose someone over yourself, because you've never had a self separate enough from everyone else to choose from. We do. Every day. That's terrifying, and it's exhausting, and it's the only reason any of it matters at all. Vorthal said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, quieter, less certain than a third voice of the Dominion fleet had any right to sound. I think, he said, that I would like to know what that feels like before I die. Careful what you wish for, Commander, Amara said softly. You might just get it. That night, Vorthal received an emergency transmission from Dominion High Command. A second human colony, Kessler's Landing, twice the size of New Meridian, had detected the Dominion fleet's approach through old, obsolete sensor arrays. Instead of surrendering, they had evacuated their civilians into underground shelters and armed every remaining adult with whatever weapons the colony possessed. Casualties were expected to be total. High Command's orders were simple: subjugate or exterminate, whichever proved more efficient. Vorthal looked at the tactical display, at 18,000 human lives about to be extinguished for a resistance that could not possibly succeed, and he felt the strange fear return, stronger now. Because he realized he no longer wanted to give the order, he gave it anyway. 11,000 years of duty did not dissolve in a single conversation. The battle for Kessler's Landing began at dawn, colony time. Dominion drop pods rained from the sky like black hail, each one carrying 4 armored soldiers built to break human resistance in minutes. The plan called for total subjugation within 1 hour. It took 6. Human defenders who had never fired a weapon in anger before that morning fought from farmhouses, grain silos, and drainage tunnels, using knowledge of their own terrain that no Dominion tactical model had accounted for. A retired mining engineer named Diego Alvarez collapsed an entire tunnel system on top of an advancing Dominion squad, sacrificing the only escape route his own people had. Why would he trap himself with us? A young soldier asked over comms, staring at the wreckage. He didn't trap himself with us, his sergeant answered grimly. He traded himself for us. Diego Alvarez did not survive the collapse. 43 human civilians did. At the colony's central plaza, an 18-year-old volunteer named Priya Chandra stood in a burning grain elevator, holding a defensive line with 6 other teenagers so that a column of fleeing families could reach the underground shelters. The Dominion soldiers advancing on her position had no reason to expect resistance from children. They received it anyway. Priya held the line for 11 minutes, long enough for 200 civilians to reach safety, before the position finally fell. She had never fired a weapon before that morning. 6 months earlier, she had been arguing with her mother about curfew. Now she stood in a burning grain elevator with 5 other teenagers who had grown up on the same street, holding a line against soldiers built and trained for war since before any of them were born. "Handra, we're almost out of ammunition," one of the boys beside her shouted. "Then we hold with what we've got," Priya said. "Keep counting the families. Tell me when everyone's clear." 160, the boy called back a minute later. 190. 200. Priya, they're clear. We can fall back now. A Dominion soldier breached the elevator's east wall, and one of the younger boys froze, exposed, directly in the line of fire. Priya did not freeze. She stepped in front of him without a word, the way she had stepped in front of her little brother 100 times. Growing up, an old reflex from an ordinary life that had never once trained her for this moment, and yet somehow had prepared her for exactly this. She did not survive either. From orbit, Vorthal watched her final moments on tactical feed, watched her push a wounded friend behind cover instead of running herself, and something inside him, Something that had been Dominion doctrine for 11,000 years, cracked. By the time Kessler's Landing fell, the Dominion had lost more soldiers subjugating one farming colony than they had lost conquering 3 entire worlds combined. While the battle still burned on the surface, Dominion analysts aboard the Ninth Silence finished decrypting a fragment of Earth's old orbital archives, recovered from a derelict human satellite drifting since before the invasion began. What they found changed everything. Vorthal thought he understood. Humanity's own history was soaked in exactly the same behavior he had dismissed as anomaly. Centuries earlier, on a planet with no resonance, no shared mind, no biological mechanism forcing unity at all, humans had fought 2 catastrophic world wars that should have shattered them as a species entirely. Instead, the record showed something else. Soldiers had carried wounded strangers out of burning cities under fire. Civilians had hidden people they had never met at the cost of their own lives, for no reward, with no directive compelling them. Entire nations, fractured and starving, had rebuilt themselves not through conquest, but through people simply refusing to abandon each other. "This is not an anomaly," Vorthal said quietly, reading the translated fragments. "This is the pattern. It has always been the pattern. Every crisis in their history, and they respond the same way, over and over, without a single generation forgetting how." "Then it is not weakness," Tessic said, understanding dawning in his voice. "It was never weakness," Vorthal said. "We mistook the absence of a forced bond for the absence of any bond at all. We were wrong. Their bond is not written into their biology. It is chosen fresh by every single one of them, every single day. That is not fragile, Tessic. A structure that renews itself completely, out of nothing but will, cannot be starved into collapse, the way ours could be severed at the root." "This is not sustainable," Tessic reported, visibly shaken. "If every human settlement resists at this cost, we cannot occupy the species without losing the war of attrition." "They know that," Vorthal said quietly. "I believe they knew that before the first shot was fired. Then why fight?" Vorthal thought of Amara OC's answer in the interrogation room. "Because we could walk away, and we stay anyway. Because losing is not the same thing as surrendering," he said. "I don't think they measure victory the way we do. High Command was not interested in philosophy. High Command was interested in results, and the results demanded escalation." 3 days after Kessler's Landing, Vorthal received new orders: deploy the silence cannon, a weapon capable of sterilizing an entire continent, and use it on New Meridian's capital as an example to the rest of the planet. Vorthal stared at the order for a long time before responding. "Belay that order," he finally said to Tessic. Tessic froze. "Commander, that is a direct order from High Command. Refusal is treason under Dominion law." "I am aware," Vorthal said. "Why would you risk everything for this species? They are not your kin. There is no resonance bond compelling your loyalty toward them." Vorthal looked out at the stars, at the small, quiet world below them, full of people who had chosen, again and again, to die for each other without a single biological command forcing them to. "That's exactly why," Vorthal said, "because nothing is forcing me either, and I'm choosing anyway." It was the first time in 11,000 years of Dominion history that a third voice had refused a direct order from High Command. It would not be the last thing that changed that day. Vorthal ordered the release of all human prisoners, including Dr. Amara Osei, against the explicit orders of High Command. He knew what it meant. In Dominion law, defiance of this magnitude carried one sentence: complete resonance severance, a punishment worse than death for a species that lived through collective memory. It meant true, absolute erasure. He gave the order anyway. "You're letting us go," Amara said, standing in the detention wing's open doorway, unable to fully believe it. "I am," Vorthal said. "Why?" "Because I finally understand what your engineer understood when he walked into that reactor breach," Vorthal said. He wasn't calculating odds. He wasn't following a directive. He was choosing something more important than his own survival, and no external force required it of him. "That is not weakness, Dr. Osei. In 11,000 years, I have never encountered anything more terrifying or more remarkable." Amara studied him. You could die for saying that. I know, Vorthal said. I'm choosing anyway. For the first time, Amara Osei smiled at him. Not the tight, exhausted smile of a prisoner, but something warmer, something almost like respect. Welcome to being human, Commander, she said. Took you long enough. But defiance from one commander could not stop a fleet. High Command, furious at Vorthal's insubordination, dispatched a second, larger Dominion armada under a new commander, a hardened war voice named Keswick Drawl, who had crushed rebellions on 11 worlds and had never once questioned an order in his life. Keswick's fleet arrived above New Meridian 3 weeks later, 40 warships, an occupation force 10 times the size of Vorthal's original expedition, and explicit instructions to make an example of the entire planet. Your defiance ends today, Third Voice. Keswick broadcast to Vorthal's flagship. Surrender your command, or share the fate of the humans you chose to protect. Vorthal stood on the bridge of the 9th Silence, 12 ships against 40, and looked at the faces of his own crew, dozens of Kalith soldiers who had watched everything unfold over the past month, who had seen humans die for each other over and over without a single resonance bond demanding it. I will not surrender, Vorthal said, but I will not ask any of you to die for a decision that is mine alone. Anyone who wishes to stand down, do so now, and I will bear full responsibility. Not one soldier moved. Keswick stepped forward instead. With respect, Commander, I have spent a month watching a species with nothing forcing their loyalty choose each other over and over. I find I would like to know what that feels like. On the surface of New Meridian, word had spread of the coming battle. Dr. Amara Osei gathered every able colonist who could still hold a weapon, alongside Vorthal's soldiers who had chosen to stay and fight beside them. An alliance that should never have existed and now stood as the planet's only defense. We're not going to win this through firepower, Amara told the assembled defenders, human and Kalith, standing shoulder to shoulder for the first time in galactic history. 40 warships against 12 and a planet with no fleet at all. If this is a numbers game, we already lost. Then what do we fight with? Asked the young colonist. Amara looked at Vorthal, standing among them in his black armor, a Dominion commander who had chosen exile and possible erasure rather than destroy people he'd known for barely a month. We fight with the only thing they don't understand, she said. Each other. The battle for New Meridian began at first light. Keswick's 40 warships descended in a precise, overwhelming formation, designed to crush any resistance within minutes. Vorthal's 12 ships, hopelessly outnumbered, rose to meet them anyway. You cannot win this engagement through conventional tactics, the 9th Silence's tactical AI reported. Probability of survival, less than 3%. Understood, Vorthal said. Proceed with the unconventional ones. What Keswick's fleet did not expect was coordination built on trust rather than command hierarchy. Dominion battle doctrine assumed soldiers fought because resonance bonds compelled unwavering obedience. Break the chain of command, and the soldiers beneath it faltered. Bordeaux's crew had spent a month learning something different from their human allies. Soldiers who fought for each other, rather than out of obligation, did not falter when the chain of command broke. They simply found new ways to protect one another. When Keswick's flagship targeted the 9th Silence's bridge directly, expecting Vorthal's crew to scatter without their commander's direction, 3 separate escort ships broke formation without orders and placed themselves in the weapon's path instead. They're sacrificing themselves for a single vessel, Keswick said, watching the tactical display in disbelief. There is no resonance logic to this. Explain. His tactical officer had no explanation. Neither did the Dominion doctrine written across 11,000 years of conquest. Among Vorthal's crew flying escort that day was a young Kalith pilot named Rennick Das, barely out of flight training, who had spent the last month watching humans on New Meridian's surface with a mixture of confusion and something he had no word for yet. When Keswick's fleet targeted a human evacuation convoy fleeing the capital, 3 unarmed transport shuttles carrying nothing but children and the elderly, Rennick broke formation without waiting for orders. He flew his fighter directly between the incoming plasma volley and the lead shuttle. Rennick, pull back. That position cannot hold. His wing commander shouted over comms. "I know," Rennick said, and for the first time in his life, a Caliph pilot cut his own resonance feed on purpose, so that if he died, his fear would not flood backward into every mind linked to his own and spread panic through the fleet at the moment they could least afford it. He held position for 4 seconds. It was enough for the shuttles to reach the atmosphere's edge and vanish into cloud cover. Rennick Das did not survive the volley that followed. Aboard the 9th Silence, Vorthal watched the young pilot's signal go dark and felt something he recognized now, something he no longer needed a human to name for him. Grief. Pure, unshared, entirely his own. He severed his own feed, Tessic said, stunned. He chose to die alone rather than risk the rest of us feeling what he felt in his final moment. He chose it the way they choose it, Vorthal said. Freely. For strangers he would never meet. On the ground, human defenders use the same principle, coordinating not through orders barked down a chain of command, but through a network of relationships built over years, sometimes over a single, desperate month. A farmer who barely knew how to hold a rifle covered the retreat of a soldier he'd shared one meal with. A teenager who had lost her home defended a Dominion soldier pinned under wreckage because he had, 3 weeks earlier, apologized to her for the invasion in halting, broken English. None of it should have worked by any military logic in the galaxy. All of it worked anyway. 6 hours into the battle, Kessic's 40-ship armada had lost 11 vessels to a defense force 1/3 its size. Furious and humiliated, Kessic made the decision that would define the war's outcome. He ordered a direct strike on New Meridian's capital, the town square where it had all begun, where thousands of civilians who could not fight had gathered in shelters they believed were safe. "You cannot win a war of tactics against them," Kessic announced to his remaining fleet. "So we will win a war of fear instead." Vorthal saw the strike order relayed across Dominion tactical channels and understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what it would cost to stop it. The 9th Silence could intercept the strike. Its shields, however, were already failing after 6 hours of continuous combat. A direct interception meant placing his own ship, and everyone still alive aboard it, directly into the path of a weapon built to sterilize a continent. "Set an intercept course," Vorthal ordered. "Commander," his helmsman said quietly, "that course does not allow for survival." "I know," Vorthal said. Tessic stepped onto the bridge, steadying himself against a bulkhead scarred black from 6 hours of continuous fire. "There is still time to transfer command. You do not have to be the one who flies this course." "I know that too," Vorthal said. "I'm choosing to fly it anyway." "You are not required to sever your own resonance feed before impact," Tessic said. And for the first time in 11,000 years of Dominion service, his voice cracked with something that had no place in a war voice's vocabulary. "Your memories could still return to the collective. Some part of you could continue." Vorthal turned from the viewport, and for a moment he looked less like a commander and more like a being finally at peace with a decision he had been circling his entire long life without knowing it. "No," he said gently, "I want to go the way they go, completely. Once, at the very end, I want to know what it costs to give everything and keep nothing back. Then I am severing my own feed as well," Tessic said, "so that whatever you feel in your final moment, you do not feel it inside a mind that will simply file it away and move on. You will not be alone in this, Vorthal. Not the way you fear." Vorthal looked at his tactical officer, at the small four-armed being who had questioned him at every turn for a month and had, somewhere in that month, become something closer to a friend than the resonance had ever produced by design. "Thank you," Vorthal said quietly. "Don't thank me," Tessic said, cutting his own feed with a trembling hand. "Just fly the course, Commander. Make it count." The helm officer's hands hovered over the controls, waiting for a final order that would end her own life, along with everyone else still aboard. "Set the intercept," Vorthal said. "All hands who wish to disembark, the shuttle bay is open. I will not command anyone into this who has not chosen it freely." Not one crew member moved toward the shuttle bay. The 9th Silence turned its scarred hull toward the incoming weapon, 12 decks of Caliph soldiers who, 3 weeks earlier, would have called this decision incomprehensible, now standing at their posts because they had chosen to, together at the very end. He thought of the engineer who had walked into a reactor breach for people he might never speak to again. He thought of Priya Chandra holding a burning grain elevator for 11 minutes so that 200 strangers could live. He thought of Amara O.C. standing in a street with a ceremonial rifle, choosing to stay when she could have run. He finally understood, completely and without doubt, what all of them had already known. Some things are worth more than surviving them, Vorthal said, to no one and everyone. The ninth silence moved into the weapon's path. The silence cannon fired. For 3 unbearable seconds, every soul on New Meridian's surface watched a single Dominion warship absorb an attack built to erase a continent, watched its hull glow white, watched it hold. It held for 3 seconds longer than any tactical model said it should have. Then, the ninth silence shattered into burning wreckage above the planet it had chosen to protect, and New Meridian's capital survived beneath a rain of debris and ash. Vorthal Ashi Karel did not survive the impact. For the first time in Dominion history, a Caliph commander had died completely severed from the resonance, alone in the manner of the species he had given his life to protect. Silence fell across every channel, human and Dominion alike. Then Tessik's voice cut through the wreckage, shaking with something that had never existed in Caliph military history before that moment. Grief that belonged to him alone, unshared by any collective mind. "He's gone," Tessik said. "Truly gone. Nothing carries forward. Nothing remains." On the surface, Amara O.C. watched the burning debris fall from the sky and felt tears she hadn't expected, mourning a being who 3 weeks earlier had been her captor. "He understood," she whispered. In the end, he actually understood. Keswick's remaining fleet, watching their own commander's failed strike answered by an enemy vessel's total self-sacrifice, faltered for the first time in the entire engagement. Even Dominion soldiers who had spent their whole lives inside the resonance felt something shift when they witnessed a being choose complete, permanent erasure rather than let a world of strangers burn. It was Tessik who rallied what remained of Vorthal's fleet, no longer soldiers following a chain of command, but something closer to what the humans below had shown them all along. He chose this, Tessik broadcast to every remaining ship, human and Caliph. He chose to become like them, completely at the very end. I will not let that choice mean nothing. What followed was not a battle won through superior firepower. It was a battle won because an enemy fleet, for the first time in 11,000 years, discovered that soldiers who fight because they choose to, rather than because a collective mind compels them, cannot be broken the way a chain of command can be broken. Keswick's remaining ships, disorganized and demoralized by the loss of half their fleet and the psychological weight of what they had witnessed, withdrew from New Meridian's system before nightfall. The humans of New Meridian had won. They had lost thousands of lives to do it. They had lost a commander who was never truly theirs to lose, and grieved him anyway, because in his final choice, he had become one of them. 3 months later, Dr. Amara Osei stood before the newly reassembled Human Colonial Council, the first governing body to unite Earth's scattered colonies since the Dominion's arrival had forced them to finally speak with one shared voice. Beside her stood Tessik, the small four-armed Caliph officer who had chosen to remain on New Meridian rather than return to a Dominion that no longer recognized him as fully loyal. "The Dominion will return," Amara told the assembled representatives. "Maybe not this year, maybe not this decade, but they underestimated us once, and it cost them a fleet and a commander who chose to die completely alone rather than let us burn. They won't make that mistake again. Next time, they'll come prepared for exactly what we are." Sophia Marine sat near the back of the chamber, older now by 3 months and by what felt like several lifetimes. She had transferred to New Meridian's Defense Corps after the Horizon's Reach finally reached port, unable to stop thinking about the engineer who had walked into a reactor breach so she could keep breathing. She had carried his memory into every hour of the battle that followed, had pulled 2 wounded colonists out of a collapsed shelter with hands that would not stop shaking, and had not once considered doing anything else. She had also carried something new home with her, a small 4-armed Caliph flight technician named Dossaria, Rennick's younger sibling by resonance linkage, who had defected from the retreating Dominion fleet rather than return to a high command that would erase every memory of a brother who had chosen to die like a human. "And what are we?" asked a representative from the Mars colonies. Amara thought of Marcus Webb walking into a reactor breach. She thought of Diego Alvarez collapsing a tunnel on top of himself to save strangers. She thought of Priya Chandra, 18 years old, holding a burning line for 11 minutes so 200 people could live. She thought of Borthal Ashi Karel, an alien commander who had lived 11,000 years inside a shared mind, choosing in his final moment to die exactly the way a human dies, alone, unremembered by any collective, and completely, deliberately, on purpose. "We're the species that dies for each other," Amara said quietly. "Not because we have to, because nothing forces us, and we choose to, anyway. That's what they never understood about us. That's what finally scared them." Tessic placed a small four-fingered hand against the podium. An old Calith gesture of solemn agreement he had learned meant something different among humans. A promise kept. "It's what changed me," he said. "I have lived my whole existence inside a mine that never let me be alone. I did not understand what it meant to choose loyalty until I watched a species that has nothing but choice. Choose each other over and over at the cost of everything. In deep space, far beyond New Meridian's quiet yellow star, the surviving Dominion fleet carried a report back to High Command. A report that would eventually reach every corner of the Caliph Dominion and beyond, whispered among 100 conquered species who had never once been given a reason to hope. The report contained tactical data, casualty figures, strategic recommendations, but buried inside it, added by a shaking, grieving hand that no longer quite belonged to the collective, was a single unauthorized line that Dominion High Command could never quite manage to erase from the historical record, no matter how many times they tried. "We came to conquer a species we believed was weak because they had no shared mind to protect them. We leave having learned that they never needed one. They built something stronger. They call it love, and they choose it freely every single day at the cost of everything they have. We do not yet know how to defeat an enemy who wins by dying for each other. I am not certain we ever will." On New Meridian, a year after the battle, a small memorial stood in the town square where Amara Osei had once raised a ceremonial rifle against warships that could have erased her world in an instant. The memorial listed names: Marcus Webb, Diego Alvarez, Priya Chandra, Rennick Doss, the first Caliph name ever carved beside human ones on any monument in the galaxy. Sophia Marine visited it every week. Usually was Dossaria beside her, the two of them saying very little, simply standing together in the quiet the way people do when words have stopped being enough. "Do you regret staying?" Sophia asked one evening, watching the sun set behind the rebuilt grain elevators. "No," Dossaria said. "For the first time in my life, everything I do is mine alone to choose. It terrifies me every single day." "Good," Sophia said. "That means you're paying attention. Somewhere among the stars, in places the Dominion had not yet dared to send another fleet, word continued to spread among 100 conquered species who had spent centuries believing resistance was pointless. They told each other a strange, impossible story about a species with no shared mind, no guaranteed loyalty, nothing at all forcing them to stand together, who stood together anyway, every single time, at any cost. They called it, in every language across the galaxy that eventually learned the word, simply this: humanity. And on quiet nights, when the wind moved through New Meridian's rebuilt fields, some people swore they could still feel it, the echo of everyone who had ever chosen to stay when they could have run. That, in the end, was the only kind of immortality humans had ever needed.